My name is Alina Cross, and when I was 13 years old, my parents decided I was no longer worth keeping. They didn't shout. They didn't cry. They didn't even argue. They just finished with me. But that part of the story doesn't begin on the night I was forced to leave. It begins years earlier, in a house where love was measured, rationed, and quietly withheld. I grew up in a small blue house on the edge of a working-class neighborhood. My father, Mark, fixed industrial equipment and came home exhausted. My mother, Lydia, worked retail and ruled the household with quiet authority. She didn't need to raise her voice to make you feel small, she just had to look at you. My older sister, Rachel, was everything I wasn't. Confident, loud, effortlessly admired. Teachers adored her. Neighbors remembered her name. My mother glowed whenever someone told her how much Rachel reminded them of her. I was the afterthought. Not abused, not screamed at, just overlooked. Rachel had birthday parties with friends and themed cakes. I had dinners at the table with a grocery store cake that said "Happy Birthday" in plain lettering, no name attached. Rachel had a savings account started before she could spell her own name. I found out when I was 12 and asked where mine was. My mother barely looked up from the sink. "You're adaptable," she said. "You'll figure it out." That sentence taught me exactly who I was in that family. The summer everything broke, I applied, quietly to an academic program at a state university. 6 weeks, residential, fully funded. I didn't tell anyone. I'd learned hope was safer when kept secret. When the acceptance email arrived, I stared at the screen for 10 full minutes. I mattered, for one afternoon. That same week, Rachel announced she wanted to attend an expensive arts camp out of state. No scholarship, no backup plan, just expectation. At dinner, my mother didn't hesitate. "Alina will decline her program," she said calmly. "We can't afford both." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, but completely. "I'm not declining," I said. The room went still. My mother looked at me the way you look at a problem you've decided not to solve anymore. "If you won't put this family first," she replied, "then you don't belong in it." I didn't know she meant that literally. 3 days later, I came home to my life stuffed into trash bags on the front porch. And that was the last evening I ever spent as their daughter. But what I didn't know, what would take 15 years to surface, was that while I sat outside in the dark, waiting for someone to come back for me, paperwork was being signed inside that house. Papers that would eventually decide everything. I waited on that porch for 4 hours, not pacing, not crying, just sitting on the trash bags that held everything I owned, knees pulled to my chest, watching the sky darken and the streetlights flicker on one by one. At 13, I still believed adults changed their minds. I believed my mother would open the door again and say this had gone too far. I believed my father would finally speak up. I believed my sister might come outside and sit next to me. None of that happened. The porch light stayed off. Cars passed. Neighbors glanced, then looked away. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could keep moving while my life had completely stopped. At a little after 10 that night, headlights finally turned into the driveway. A silver sedan. Older, dusty, not familiar. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out slowly, like he wasn't sure what he was about to walk into. My Uncle Thomas Cross. I hadn't seen him in years. He lived several hours away and rarely visited. I only remembered him as the quiet relative who sent cards with handwritten notes instead of money. He took one look at me sitting there and stopped. "Alina?" he asked, voice unsteady. I nodded. My throat wouldn't work. He didn't ask questions, didn't look toward the house, didn't knock. He walked straight to me, crouched down, and pulled me into a hug so tight it knocked the breath out of my lungs. "You're coming with me," he said softly. "You're safe now." That was it. No speeches, no conditions, just certainty. We drove through the night. I stared out the window while trees blurred past, trying to understand how my entire life could fit into 2 garbage bags on the backseat floor. I asked one question somewhere around midnight. "Did I do something wrong?" He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "No," he said, "they did." Those 3 words rewired something in my brain. Thomas's house wasn't big. One story, slightly outdated. But when he opened the door and showed me a bedroom that was mine, not temporary, not shared, I broke down for the first time. I cried until I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up expecting to be sent back. I wasn't. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Thomas enrolled me in a new school, helped me apply for programs, showed up to parent meetings without ever acting like it was an inconvenience. He never once said, "You owe me." What I didn't know, what no one told me, was that the night he picked me up, my parents had done more than throw me out. They had made it official, legal, permanent. But at 13, all I knew was this: someone had chosen me when the people who were supposed to didn't. And that choice would quietly shape everything that came next. 15 years later, the people who abandoned me would walk into a room believing they still had a claim on me, on my life, on someone else's legacy. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Living with Uncle Thomas didn't magically fix me. What it did was give me space to breathe. For the first year, I moved like a guest in my own life. I asked permission for everything. I apologized too much. I waited for the moment he'd decide I was too much trouble and send me away like everyone else eventually did. That moment never came. Instead, Thomas did something radical. He treated my presence as permanent. He put my name on the mailbox, hung my drawings on the fridge, opened a file folder labeled Alina School, and actually cared what went inside it. When teachers called, he answered. When I struggled, he listened. When I succeeded, he celebrated like it mattered. Because to him, it did. Slowly, painfully, I started to believe I wasn't disposable. I poured myself into school, not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because learning felt like control. Math made sense. Science had rules. Effort produced results. Unlike people, equations didn't change their minds about your worth. By sophomore year of high school, I was at the top of my class. By senior year, I was giving speeches I never would have believed I could stand up and deliver. When my name was called as valedictorian, Thomas stood and clapped so loudly people turned around to stare. I didn't look for my parents in the crowd. I already knew they wouldn't be there. College came next. Scholarships, internships, long nights and early mornings. Thomas never pressured me, but he never let me settle either. When I doubted myself, he'd say, "You don't need permission to succeed." After graduation, I joined his business, something he'd built from nothing over decades. I started at the bottom. Filing, data entry, learning how systems actually worked. I earned every promotion. And that's important because years later, people would claim I hadn't. By my mid-20s, I had a career that paid well, a reputation built on results, and a quiet confidence I didn't need to announce. Thomas never called me his niece anymore. He called me his daughter. I didn't correct him. My biological family reached out exactly twice during those years. Once for money, once for appearances. They never asked how I was, never apologized, never acknowledged what they'd done. And I didn't chase them for closure. I was too busy building a life that didn't revolve around their approval. Then came the diagnosis. Terminal, sudden, unfair. Thomas handled it the way he handled everything else, methodically, privately, and with plans in place. Lawyers. Paperwork, quiet conversations I didn't fully understand at the time. He told me, "Whatever happens, you'll be okay." I believed him. I just didn't know how literal he meant it. Because when he passed, the people who once discarded me came back. Dressed well, smiling confidently, convinced they were about to collect what they believed was theirs. The call came 3 days after the funeral. I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my chest tightened before the voicemail could even start. Some instincts don't fade with time. "Alina," the voice said when I picked up. Warm, careful, practiced. "It's your mother." She said it like it still meant something. I didn't call her mom. I didn't correct her either. Silence can do more damage than words. "I heard about Thomas," she continued. "I'm so sorry. He was family after all." Family, interesting choice. She paused just long enough to make sure I was listening. Then came the real reason for the call. "I assume there will be a will reading," she said. "Your father and I will attend. It's only appropriate." There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "How are you holding up?" Not even "I'm sorry." Just assumption, entitlement, certainty. I told her the time and place and ended the call before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with something sharper: recognition. They hadn't changed. Over the next few days, I learned they'd hired an attorney. A very confident one. The kind who wore expensive suits and spoke in guarantees. He filed paperwork challenging the will before it had even been read. The claim was simple. I had manipulated an old, sick man. I had isolated him. I had influenced his decisions. In other words, I had stolen what was rightfully theirs. When Thomas's estate attorney explained it to me, she didn't soften the language. "They don't need to win," she said. "They just need to stall things long enough to pressure you into a settlement." I thought of the porch, the trash bags, the silence. I felt strangely calm. "Let them come," I said. "I don't want a deal." The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. I arrived early, dressed professionally, nothing flashy. I didn't need to look powerful. I already was. At exactly 2 minutes past the hour, the doors opened. My parents walked in like they owned the place. My mother scanned the room with a small, satisfied smile. My father avoided eye contact. My sister followed behind them, tense and pale. Their attorney trailed last, briefcase in hand, confidence radiating off him. They expected seats at the center table. They were directed to the wall. That's when my mother's smile faltered for the first time. She looked at me then, really looked at me. And I saw it. Not love, not regret. Calculation. She thought this was the moment everything tilted back in her favor. She was wrong. Because when the attorney began reading the will, the first few clauses only built their confidence. It was Clause 7 that made my mother stand up screaming. The attorney's voice was calm, measured, almost soothing as he moved through the opening sections of the will. Dates, definitions, confirmations of sound mind. My parents relaxed with every sentence. I could see it in my mother's posture, the slight lean forward, the confident tilt of her chin. This was going exactly how she'd imagined. Formalities first, delay tactics later. Settlement after that. Then the attorney paused. "We will now proceed to Clause 7, he said. Something in his tone changed. Not dramatic, just deliberate. My mother straightened fully. Clause 7 began with a single sentence that felt like a held breath. "I make no provision in this will for Mark and Lydia Cross." Silence. Not confusion, silence. The kind that presses against your ears. My father blinked like he hadn't heard correctly. My sister's mouth parted slightly. My mother didn't react at all at first. She just stared, frozen, as the attorney continued reading Thomas's own words, his reasons, laid out plainly. The unpaid debt, the years of estrangement, the choices they had made. Then came the sentence that changed everything. On July 18, 2011, Mark and Lydia Cross voluntarily relinquished all parental rights to their minor daughter, Alina Cross, transferring full legal guardianship to me. My mother shot to her feet. "That's irrelevant," she shouted. "That was temporary, just paperwork." The attorney didn't look up. "Legally," he said, "it was permanent." My chest tightened, not with shock, but with confirmation. The truth had always been there. I'd just never been allowed to see it. The attorney continued. "As a result of this legal action, Mark and Lydia Cross severed all parental rights and standing. They are not considered immediate family to my heir." "Heir?" my sister whispered. The attorney turned the page. "I formally adopted Alina Cross on September 2, 2013. That was when my mother's face went white. Adopted, not raised, not helped. Adopted. My father sank back into his chair like someone had pulled the air out of him. My sister stared at me, eyes wide, searching my face for answers I didn't owe her. My mother's voice cracked, sharp and desperate. "You can't just erase blood." That was the moment I finally spoke. "You did," I said quietly. 15 years ago, in ink." The attorney cleared his throat and delivered the final blow. "Therefore, under this will, Alina Cross is the sole legal beneficiary of the estate in its entirety." My mother opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. The confidence she'd walked in with collapsed in real time. And the worst part, Clause 7 wasn't even the last surprise Thomas had planned. Because just when they thought they'd hit rock bottom, the attorney reached for one final envelope and asked if I would allow him to read it aloud. The attorney held up a smaller envelope, different paper, handwritten name. "This," he said, "is a personal letter Thomas Cross left with instructions. It may be read aloud only with Alina's consent." Every eye in the room turned to me. My mother's face was still drained of color. My father hadn't looked up since the word adopted landed like a verdict. My sister sat perfectly still, like any movement might shatter what little was left of the moment. I nodded once. "Yes," I said, "please read it." The attorney opened the envelope carefully, unfolding a single page. His voice softened, not unprofessionally, but humanly. "Elena," he read, "if you're hearing this, then the people who once abandoned you have returned, not for reconciliation, but for reward." My mother flinched. "I want you to know that nothing about this surprised me. I prepared for it not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Some people don't come back because they miss you. They come back because they miss what they think you owe them." The room was silent. No shifting, no whispers. "You arrived at my door as a frightened child who believed she was unlovable. You were wrong then, and you're wrong now. You didn't survive despite what happened to you. You survived because of who you are." My throat tightened. "I did not rescue you," the letter continued. "I simply refused to turn away. Everything you've become, you built. I only gave you a place where it was safe to do so." My mother let out a small sound, half scoff, half plea. The attorney didn't pause. "To anyone listening who believes blood grants entitlement, love is proven through action, not biology. Elena proved herself every day. Others removed themselves." Then the final lines. "Elena, you owe no one guilt. You owe no one access. You owe no one forgiveness. Live freely, lead boldly, and never doubt that you were chosen not out of obligation, but out of love." The attorney folded the letter and looked up. "That concludes the personal statement." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother stood again, but this time there was no fire in her voice. "Elena," she said, softer now, "we were under pressure. We made mistakes. You can't honestly believe this means we don't matter at all." I met her eyes. "This doesn't mean you don't matter," I said. "It means you don't get to decide my life anymore." She searched my face for hesitation. There was none. The attorney cleared his throat and resumed the proceedings, but the outcome was already sealed. The room had shifted. The story they came to sell had collapsed under the weight of the truth. And yet, Thomas still wasn't finished. Because what followed next wasn't about punishment. It was about legacy. Just when they thought the worst was over, the attorney announced how the estate would be used and who would be watching it happen. Once the letter was read, the room didn't explode the way people imagine moments like that do. There was no shouting, no dramatic walkout, just a slow, heavy understanding that the outcome was no longer negotiable. The attorney adjusted his papers and continued, voice steady, procedural, almost mercifully boring compared to what had just happened. He outlined the estate's structure, the businesses, the properties, the accounts, then the charitable allocations Thomas had arranged years in advance. Education funds, housing initiatives, long-term commitments that would continue after him, all under my authority. That detail mattered. I wasn't just inheriting assets. I was inheriting responsibility. And Thomas had made sure the room understood that. Representatives from 2 nonprofit organizations were present, seated quietly until now. When their names were mentioned, they nodded politely, professionals who knew exactly what this meant. The estate wasn't frozen. It wasn't in dispute. It was moving forward. My parents' attorney finally spoke, carefully this time. "We reserve the right to contest." The estate attorney cut him off with practiced calm. "There are no grounds. Standing has been clearly addressed. Any further filings would be considered frivolous and subject to penalties." That word, penalties, did what emotion couldn't. My father finally looked up, not at me, at the table, like a man realizing the ground beneath him had already given way. My sister's eyes were glossy. She didn't cry, she just looked hollow, as if she'd arrived expecting a future that had quietly vanished. My mother sat rigid, hands clenched in her lap, not angry now, something worse, powerless. The meeting ended without ceremony. People stood, chairs slid back. Soft conversations resumed around the edges. Life continued, because it always does. My parents lingered. My mother approached me slowly, like someone testing thin ice. "You didn't have to do it this way," she said. I met her gaze evenly. "This is the way it was done," I replied, "long before today." She opened her mouth again, then closed it. There was nothing left to argue, no leverage, no narrative to spin. They left without saying goodbye. That was the last time I saw my father in person. A week later, I learned their attorney had withdrawn from the case. Quietly, no appeal, no drama, just a filing and silence. The system doesn't always deliver justice loudly. Sometimes it just closes the door and locks it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing on the outside. But closure isn't the same as healing. Because a few weeks later, I received one letter I never expected, written in a different hand, with a very different tone. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped between bank statements and junk mail like it didn't carry the weight of 15 years. The return address wasn't my parents'. It was my sister's. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter and made coffee, letting the kettle scream while I stood there reminding myself that I didn't owe anyone access to my life anymore. When I finally opened it, I expected excuses. What I found instead was accountability. She wrote about the night I was left on the porch, about watching from her bedroom window, about knowing it was wrong and choosing silence anyway. She didn't blame our parents. She didn't blame circumstances. She didn't ask for forgiveness or money or a relationship. She just told the truth. And that changed everything. Not because it erased the past, but because it didn't try to. I didn't respond immediately. Healing doesn't mean rushing toward every open door. It means choosing which ones are safe to unlock. Eventually, I wrote back with boundaries. Clear ones, non-negotiable ones. No contact through our parents. No discussions about money or the estate. No pressure, no guilt, no rewriting history. If she wanted to know me, it would be slowly or not at all. She agreed. One word, no conditions. We started with short calls. Awkward. Careful. Honest in a way we'd never been allowed to be before. We didn't become close overnight. We didn't pretend we were the sisters we might have been. We became something new, and that was enough. A year later, I stood outside one of the first buildings Thomas ever bought. A small plaque had been placed near the entrance. His name, his years, a quiet acknowledgement of a life built intentionally. I touched the metal and felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not revenge, peace. The estate had grown. The programs he cared about were thriving. A scholarship in his name now funded students who, like me, came from homes where support wasn't guaranteed. That was the inheritance that mattered. My parents never contacted me again. I don't know if they regret what they did. I don't need to know. Some chapters don't end with apologies. They end with boundaries, and that's okay. Here's what I learned, if you take anything from this story. You don't need someone's acknowledgement to heal. You don't need forgiveness to move forward. And you don't need to carry guilt for surviving what others caused. Family isn't who claims you. It's who chooses you and who you choose in return. If you've ever had to walk away to protect yourself, know this: you didn't fail. You grew, and sometimes that's the bravest ending of all.